Hi everyone, it's Kurt here again for another video, and this week we're going to be covering Chapter 8, Assessing Reading. Just a short note, two short notes. First of all, the content this time, there's a lot. There's a lot of slides, so I'm going to try to go through it very efficiently today, not explain too much. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me and let me know, and I will either bring the answer to class next week or I'll answer you directly online. Second of all, there is a Google form for this week's content. It's very simple. There are only 4 questions. And even if you only give 10% of your attention to the content this week, you'll be able to answer these questions. Just a matter of seeing who's actually watching the video and coming into Google Classroom. So make sure you fill that out or else you will be considered absent for the class. All right, let me jump in. So this week, we're moving on to assessing reading. Okay, so what are the learning objectives for this chapter? First of all is to determine when reading can be assessed as a separate skill and when it should be integrated. As always, we talk about the integration of skills together and whether or not we can isolate them. Second is to find the overlap between assessing reading as an implicit skill and as an explicit form-focused one. We're going to look at performance-based assessment, developing assessments that cover micro and macro skills, and then design assessments that target varying modes of performance. Now, in this chapter, there are a lot of examples. When I get to the examples part, I'm going to flip through them pretty fast. There are more in the book that I'm not going to cover today. Just what you should be focused on as you're listening or reading or doing both is what are the different types of reading performance, and then what kind of items are available to assess them. Okay, so we'll start with a question. And I have a few questions during today's talk. So while you're listening and reading the slides, what you should do is pause the video and try to answer this by yourself without looking at my slides first. Really activate your critical thinking and think more deeply about these. That will help you for the next test as well. So the first question is, when we assess reading, what are we really assessing? So this goes back to the input skills. Remember, we talked about listening. Can you truly assess someone's listening processes, or are you indirectly assessing based on some other type of performance you ask them to do? So what is it that we're assessing? Okay. So basically, there are 2 main areas that we should be assessing in terms of reading performance. The first one, of course, is their comprehension. Are they able to understand the content that they are reading? But the second one is also the strategies that they use. As you know, to be a good reader, you should employ multiple strategies to help you understand the content that you're reading, make predictions, scan, skim, all of these different skills. And so we should be assessing those, and we should be assessing the strategies that students aren't using as well. Okay, second question. Can you observe the reading process or the reading product? Okay, same thing. Think about this first before you continue on. Pause the video. All right. So the clear answer is no. And we went through this in previous chapters. You can't actually observe someone's reading process because it's happening inside the brain. Well, how about the product? Can you observe someone's reading comprehension? Again, no, you can't. You can only observe the output that you ask them to give, which is matching, writing, speaking, standing up, whatever it is. That is something else. You're not actually observing the product of their reading. And so again, when we assess reading, we're indirectly assessing what they are doing by asking them to do something else, like write an answer or choose the correct multiple choice distractor item, whatever we want to say. Okay. So before we get into types of assessment and types of reading performance, we should be aware of what are the different genres of reading that are available for assessment. And this really comes down to needs assessment. What is it that your students need to learn how to do to make them successful in the future? So depending on the level that you're teaching at, but the key point here is there are so many different types of reading that you can have your students do. All right, so let's very, very quickly go through them. I'm not going to read each individual one, but for today, we're looking at 3 major areas, which is academic reading, job-related, and personal. So let's look at personal, because I think those are more common in the younger ages. So we've got newspapers and magazines and emails and greeting cards and invitations and messages, texts, notes, lists, blogs, schedules, and so on. And so you can see, actually, there's so many different types of reading texts that you can have your students learn, and then you can assess them on. Okay. So why should we do this? Now, again, you should stop and think about this before I talk about it more. Why should we give students a variety of genres for assessment? Why not just do, nonfiction articles and then test their comprehension? Okay. Well, basically, if you're going to be an efficient reader, you need to know what your purpose in reading a text is. First of all, why am I reading an invitation? Because I need to know what the invitation's for. I need to know when it is, where it is, who's inviting me, and can I bring somebody with me? Do I need to bring a gift? What is it I need to prepare? Do I need to prepare food? What time should I arrive? All of this information. And so if you're a first-time reader of an invitation, of course you may not think about all of those things. You'll just think, ooh, party. Okay, I'm going. So of course, you need to learn the necessary strategies for accomplishing the purpose for every type of genre. And you also need to learn how to retain that information. So the more practice you give them, of course, the more skilled they become at reading these different types of genres. And this is very authentic, right? Because these genres they will come in contact with them in their real lives. Okay, again, we have the micro skills and the macro skills. I'm not going to read them. You can read them at your own time. But again, remember, those micro skills are what we call the bottom-up skills, where we're focusing more specifically at the language being used. And then we also have the macro skills, which are the top-down, and we're looking more at the global skill of reading. You can see a lot of them are quite similar to the listening and speaking skills as well. Okay, so before we get into the types of performance, let's think about strategies. So again, pause the video, brainstorm a little bit without looking at the book and without looking at the slides. What are some strategies that students can or should use for reading? Which means, what are the strategies that we should be teaching our students to do so they can be successful readers? And then what are the strategies we should be assessing? Okay, so here are 10, and I'll very quickly go through them. The first one is to identify your purpose for reading. These are not in order of most important or anything, just 10 strategies. The second is apply spelling rules and conventions for bottom-up processing. Use lexical analysis to determine meaning. So you see, these are the micro skills, right? We're focusing specifically on the language. Guess at the meaning when you're unsure. Skim the text for gist and main ideas. Scan the text for specific information. If you don't know the difference between skim and scan, make sure you look those 2 words up. Number 7, use silent reading for rapid processing. When we talk about teaching reading, it's very important that students have an opportunity to do silent reading and reading for personal enjoyment. Number 8, use marginal notes, outlines, charts, or semantic maps to understand and retain information. So we talked about that before. You teach the different genres. One of the reasons is to teach them how to retain information. So that's a strategy that they need to learn how to do. Instead of just trying to memorize everything, are there other ways? Number 9, distinguish between literal and implied meanings. You see that everywhere, right? And number 10, use discourse markers to process relations. So not only do you understand what the discourse marker means, but how does that affect the meaning of the text? These are very important. and you can test them as well. Okay, so let's get into the different types of reading performance. For reading, there are 4 types. They are listed here. The first one is perceptive. The second one is selective. The third is interactive. And the fourth is extensive. Now, for our course, as I said, I'm going to show a lot of different examples, and I'm going to fly through them pretty fast because they are all very self-explanatory. But what you should be more focused on in learning is what's the difference between these 4 types. What makes it perceptive, what makes it selective, what makes it interactive, and what makes it extensive. And then which types of items are more suitable for that type of reading performance. Okay, so the first one is perceptive. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to give a brief definition of each type, and then we're going to look at the general characteristics in terms of how long the text should be, what the focus of the reading should be, and so on. And then after I go through each type, go through the definitions, then I'm going to move on to the different items that you can design for each type. So perceptive reading. These tasks involve attending to the components of larger stretches of discourse. So we're not just looking at vocabulary. Here we're looking at sentences and or paragraphs. If the discourse is too short, it's not reading, it's more grammar and vocabulary, right? But we're still looking at the letters, the words, the punctuation, and so on. So we're still focused on the very specific parts of the language. And it's implied here that students will use bottom-up processing. So here you will be assessing the micro skills. Okay, the second one is selective reading. So these tasks are used to gauge a student's reading recognition of lexical, grammatical, or discourse features of language in a short stretch of language. So you'll see some similarity between selective and interactive and extensive, but for selective, it's a short stretch. The stimuli can include sentences, short paragraphs, simple charts, and graphs. Brief responses are expected, so you're not writing paragraph or full essay answers. And in this case, probably you have a healthy balance between bottom-up and top-down processing. Okay, the third one is interactive reading. So here now the samples are several paragraphs to 1 page or more, so it's a longer text. And here readers need to interact with the text, and they need to negotiate meaning by using their schemata. Remember, schemata means their background knowledge. So what they already know about the topic or the genre that they are interacting with. So genres often used for this type could be anecdotes, short narratives and descriptions, maybe an excerpt from a longer text, a questionnaire, a memo, announcement, directions, recipes, and so on. The focus here, though, is to identify the relevant features in the text with the goal of retaining the information. And this is more top-down processing. So we're starting to look at more of the macro skills. Okay, then the last one is extensive reading. So you could probably guess by now that these are much longer texts. These are your professional articles, an essay, technical report, short stories, books, and so on. And the purpose of the assessment is to tap into their global understanding of the text. So now we're not looking for specific information per se. We're looking for, can you interpret the information? Are you able to make your own judgments or predictions based on the text that you've read? So for this one, it's necessary that you use top-down processing. You cannot just focus on the specific language being used. Okay, so here's a summary. This is very useful for studying for the final exam when you're trying to distinguish between the different types. So if we look at the length of the text, you can see that perceptive is short, and selective could be short or could be medium, but it won't be long. Interactive will definitely be medium in length, and then extensive will always be much longer text. In terms of the focus on assessment, At the perceptive level, it's always going to be on the form. So you're not looking at real comprehension, you're more looking at the language being used. Selective typically is on form, but you could have a little bit on meaning. And then interactive is the opposite. You could do a little bit on the form, but mostly you're assessing the meaning. And then extensive is 100% on meaning. At this stage, you will not be concerned with the grammar or the vocabulary. So you can see here the difference here between selective and interactive. The length may be similar, but interactive, you're focused more on meaning. And you can see that interactive and extensive is really where the top-down processing is more encouraged. Okay, and then we have the expected type of processing. So you can see it kind of matches here, right? Perceptive is bottom up, only bottom up. Selective will be bottom up and top down. Interactive is a little bit of bottom up, but mostly top down. And then extensive will be completely top down. Okay, so let's get into some different tasks, okay? Now, as I said, I'm going to go through these fast because I believe that they are self-explanatory. What you want to remember is what defines perceptive reading, and then what are some more appropriate type of test items that you can use for perceptive reading. And remember, when you are assessing your students, variety is very important. You want to have as many different kinds as possible. Don't always use the same type of assessment. Okay, so the first one at perceptive we call literacy tasks. So this is the very basic level. This is recognition of alphabetical symbols, capitalized and lowercase letters, punctuation words, grapheme, phoneme, correspondences. Very similar to listening at the very basic level, except now we're reading and not listening, right? The learner is in the early stages of becoming literate. Okay, we also have reading aloud. This assesses whether they are reading the correct letters and words, not pronunciation. So it's really important. Remember when we talk about validity, if you are assessing their reading ability, you are not assessing their pronunciation. So it's more about, are they saying the right word that they should be saying? If you have, if you ever teach elementary school or kindergarten and you ask them to read the letters A, B, C, Q, H, can they say the right letter? Okay, you can also have written response. This is the same stimuli as in reading aloud, but now they have to reproduce it in writing. So in this case, you're basically copying a sentence or copying words. So I see CAT on the paper and I write CAT on mine. But you have to really think about this type very carefully when you do your assessment. Are you assessing their reading or their writing? So maybe you want to do both. That's up to you. But if it's a reading assessment and their writing has some small errors, maybe you won't consider that because you are actually assessing reading, not writing. Remember, you got to keep your validity, reliability strong. Okay, you can also do multiple choice at the perceptive reading level. So it could be choosing one out of 3 or 4 choices, but you can also do other type like same, different. So I put the word cat, C-A-T, and next to it I put C-A-B, and then you ask the students, is that same or different? Circle the answer, true, false, choose a letter, matching, any types here. Just remember, you're focusing the very basic levels of the language at this stage. It's not comprehension. Okay, so here are some examples of those. We could do minimal pair distinction. So you see they circle S for same or D for different. And one thing I want to say here though is you see this test item, right? Test takers read. Circle S for same or D for different. Now, my opinion is if they have to read this in order to understand what to do, maybe this is already too easy. Or if they are actually able to, if this is the perfect level for them, they might not be able to read this prompt. So you might have to say it as well, but just a small point. Okay, next, you could also do grapheme recognition task. So for example, test takers read, circle the odd item, the one that doesn't belong. So you can see in number 1, they would circle PEACE, and in number 2, they would circle BOOT. So very simple recognition task. They could also do picture cued items. So picture cued word identification. So on this one, you see it says test takers here. Look at the picture, then read the word on each card and point to the object written on the card. Okay, so student reads CAT. They don't hear CAT, they read CAT, and then they point to the cat. That means the teacher needs to be sitting next to them and assessing them as they do it. Okay, but you could also do picture cued sentence identification instead of word. So same thing, test takers here, point to the part of the picture that you read about. So now students read this by themselves. Silently is fine, it doesn't have to be out loud, but they read, the man is reading a book, and then they point here. And again, the teacher needs to be sitting there and watching them as they do this. Okay, but you could also do matching. I apologize for the quality. I realize this picture is not great because B and D could be very ambiguous. Which object is it? But obviously you have a better picture if you were doing this on your own. You wouldn't have the objects so close to each other. But the point is still the same. So number 1, I read it by myself. Clock, I find the clock. It has a letter A, so I write A next to the clock. Okay, ignore this bottom part for this. Okay, so you could do matching. Or you could do picture cued word identification. So same thing in this question, the test takers read the word rectangle. They read it by themselves. Again, you can say it out loud, or you could just read it silently, and then they circle the rectangle or draw a happy face, whatever it is you want them to do. Okay, next one is selective reading. So remember, we're moving on to the second one, and selective reading now. The text will be a little bit longer. We're still mostly doing bottom-up skills here, even though it could be a little bit of top-down, and we're still mostly focused on the language. So these tasks include what we typically call grammar and vocabulary assessment. So you can see why it can be confusing, right? When teachers say they're testing reading, but a lot of the items that they have in their reading section still look like grammar assessment. This is why it's so hard to isolate grammar from the different skills, because you can't. They're just embedded together. But anyways, so grammar and vocabulary are the tools that we use to perform these skills, so they're equally assessed in all types of performance, as I was trying to say. Okay, so what are some different ways to do that? I know you've seen all these, so we'll go fast. You can do multiple choice vocabulary, grammar tasks, contextualized multiple choice vocabulary, grammar tasks. So this time we make it a conversation, which makes it a little bit more authentic. Now be careful. I noticed in some of your midterms that you said a lot of these items are authentic because they use authentic reading or authentic conversations. Maybe the content is more authentic, but a multiple choice item is still not authentic because we don't do multiple choice tests in the real world. So the best that we can do is add a little authenticity by making it contextualized, like in this example. Okay, anyways, moving on. You can also do multiple choice close, vocabulary, grammar task. Okay, now we're going to get to close later, so it's very important that you distinguish between the two. This one is not reading comprehension. This is for vocabulary and grammar. Later, when we look at other close items, it's more about reading comprehension. Plus, since it's multiple choice, the answers are here. Students do not need to come up with answers on their own, which makes it not a true close test. Okay, or you could do it like this. This is a multiple choice close contextual grammar task. So instead of this type, okay, we create an authentic text, and then again, they have to put the right word in. Okay, we could also do matching tasks. So here they write the letter of the definition on the right that matches the word on the left. Okay, so what does exhausted mean? Oh, C, tired, so I write C here. So you can see this is very much, you will argue this is a vocabulary or grammar type task. Okay, the next one could be selected response, fill in the blank, vocabulary task. So the words are at the bottom, put them in the right place, the 4 words down here. Okay, and then you can also do multiple choice grammar editing. So in this one, test takers read, choose the underlined word that is not correct. So if you look at sentence number 1, they read it by themselves. The abrasively action of the wind wears away softer layers of rock. So of course here, action is a noun, so we shouldn't have an adverb here. So this is the wrong one, so they circle it. Okay. Now you can also do gap filling tasks, which would be like this kind, sentence completion. Now these ones, of course, they become a little bit more subjective because now the answers are a little bit more open-ended. But remember, at the selective reading level, it's okay for them to give a response, but it must be very short. Once it gets into a longer response, that will become interactive. So here, you look at the example, Oscar says, "Doctor, what should I do if I get sick?" And the doctor's sentences are almost totally completed already. So it is best to stay home and rest. Take it easy, whatever it is, but something short. If you have a fever, what should you do? Okay. All right, so let's move on to interactive. Now, at the beginning of interactive, remember now the text is going to be longer and students are expected to have a little bit longer of a response, but the key difference here is now it's more about comprehension and less about grammar. It can still have a little bit of grammar, which you'll see in a closed task. It's impossible to get away from grammar because you have to focus on the correct word and the form of the word, but in general, it should be more about comprehension. So the first type is close. This is a sentence with a word left out. Sorry, let me go back. This is the justification for a closed task. So what we know is a sentence with a word left out should have enough context that a reader can close the gap with a calculated guess by using their linguistic expectancies and their background knowledge. So their formal schemata, which is their grammar, and their content schemata, which is your background knowledge, and some strategic competence. So this is a little bit more challenging. And as I mentioned before, this used to be a common way to do English proficiency testing. These ones, though, you see, are a minimum of 2 paragraphs in length. If you go back to the selective reading, you know it's much shorter, right? Short paragraph. Okay, now, in terms of closed tasks, there's 2 things you have to consider if you're going to do this. The first is your deletion options, and the second is your scoring option. So, the deletion option, the true closed test, is the first one, the fixed ratio deletion, where every 7th word, plus or minus 2, is deleted from the word. That shouldn't say word, that should say text or paragraph. Sorry about that. So every 7th word is deleted from the text or paragraph. I'll fix that later. Okay, now here we got plus or minus 2. And the reason is if you go to your text and the 7th word is someone's name, then of course you can't use that one because how can they guess the person's name? Or it's the name of a city or something like that. So you just go to the next word that's appropriate. But in general, you would delete in your paragraph word number 7, word number 14, word number 21 until the text is over. However, there is one rule in closed test design. It is you won't delete a word in the first sentence and you won't delete a word in the last sentence. That will help students to be able to use their reading strategies because the first sentence usually has a lot of important information. And the last sentence is also a review sentence, right? So those 2 should be left intact. Okay, or If you don't want to do fixed ratio because maybe it's too hard for your students, or you want to focus on some specific area of reading, then you can do rational deletion. So in this case, it would be deleted based on discourse or grammatical functions of the word. So this is why interactive can still be focused on the form, because you can actually delete the words that you want to focus on. Okay, now the second option is, so what I want to say is, if you are doing close for reading proficiency only, language ability, like you want to know how strong they are at English overall, then you should do the fixed ratio deletion. If you want to specifically target nouns or verbs or adjectives or past tense verbs or something, then you use rational deletion. Okay, I hope that's clear. All right, in terms of scoring, how you can score it is you can use exact word scoring, which means it must use the original word from the text. Now, the second way is appropriate word scoring. So any word that's grammatically correct and makes sense is correct. So you may be wondering, why would I use exact word or why would I use appropriate word? Okay, well, let's assume that you have, well, actually, I'll give you an example and then I'll talk about it later, okay? So here is an example of fixed ratio deletion. Now, in later slides, I have the answers to these, but what I'd like you to do is pause the video and I'd like you to try, okay? I'd like you to try to complete this without looking at the answers and see what words you come up. And then I want you to compare your answers to the answers that I'm going to share with you after this, okay? So this is every seventh word. So you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Really every seventh word. So it doesn't matter what it is. Okay. So I hope you're done. You've paused, and now we're going to look at the answers, okay? So here are what I consider. Now, I only did this in like 2 minutes. So there are more choices, but here are the possible answers that I came up with. So the recognition that one's feelings of happiness and unhappiness. So I used my strategy, right, of opposite, because I also looked down below at the next one, something and hate. And I know that that's probably love and hate, because that collocation goes together, right? But so does happiness and unhappiness. Okay. It's possible that you wrote something else for number one, joy. I mean, it makes sense, so it could be okay. But probably happiness, it would be the best choice. But let's get to number 3. So maybe you chose one of the ones that I put in there, but they're all fine, right? So the recognition that one's feelings of happiness and unhappiness can coexist, much like love and hate in a close relationship, may offer, can offer, might offer, and so on. There are many choices here. Okay. Valuable clues on how to. Now, I wrote live because I thought, oh, that's easily the best answer. We'll find out later. Actually, live is not the correct answer. It's lead. Okay. It suggests for instance, for example. And of course, there are more choices. And then number 6, avoiding things that you probably make. This is, for me, seems quite obvious, but there may be another word there. Make you miserable may well make you less miserable, but probably no happier. Okay, so I think probably those are, for me, the choices. Now, I want to go back to the question of scoring. So if you used exact word scoring, I did not get 100% on this paragraph. But the choices, for example, I forget what the words are we can look. Okay. So you can see here in this example, I'll talk about this later, but you can look here, may. May is the correct answer, okay? And then here it is lead, a happier life. Okay, but I chose live. I got may right, and I wrote for instance, but the answer is for example. So in this one, I got 5 out of 7 if you use exact word scoring. So you should be saying to yourself, well, then why would you use exact word scoring? Because can and might are totally acceptable, and instance is also totally acceptable. So why do teachers use exact word scoring? The only reason that I can see that makes sense is that as an English teacher, if you're not sure which answers will be correct and which ones will be incorrect. So maybe your student writes down how to have a happier life, and maybe you're not sure. Can have be okay or not? And now you spend so much time looking it up. Maybe you need to go online or use Grammarly or whatever it is, or ask ChatGPT. And maybe one place tells you it's correct and one place tells you it's incorrect. So now you have a really hard choice to make. So if you use exact word, you can just tell the student, sorry, it's this word, and that's it. Now, my personal opinion about this is I don't like exact word scoring, because if it's correct, it makes sense and it's grammatically correct, then why couldn't it be the correct answer? So you have to think about it if you use them, unless you want the students to memorize the text before, but then that becomes something different. That's not reading, that's some type of memory task. Okay, so let me move on. So this one is the rational deletion example. So in this case, the test maker wants to test their ability using prepositions and conjunctions. So you can see now it's different words. And in this case, maybe exact word scoring is more appropriate, but possible that there are more than one answer. Okay, let's move on. So we're still in interactive reading, and now we can do impromptu reading plus comprehension questions. So remember, at the interactive level, now we're looking at top down, and you can ask students to give you a little bit longer type responses. Okay, so here is a 250 word passage, and it covers the comprehension of the following features. Okay, so there's a lot of different things that you can assess here. So what is the topic? The expression world over could be replaced by, it can be inferred. So now we have reading comprehension. This is still multiple choice items, right? Okay, you can also do it in short answer tasks. So you can have open-ended reading comprehension questions, which are different from the selective one where we had those questions about the doctor, where there's only one or two words that could go at the end of the sentence. Now it's more open-ended, right? What do you think? What would you infer? So if you want your reliability to be high and you want your practicality to be high, then you'll use a multiple choice item. If you want it to be more authentic and you want students to really show you what they know, then you'll do this type, which is short answer, because they can't guess. They have to just actually tell you what they learned from the text. This takes more time, but it's more meaningful. Okay, you can also do editing again, but this time as a longer text instead of just one sentence at a time. Same thing though, they will have to find the words that are wrong. So you look at the first sentence, ever since supermarkets first appeared, they have been take over the world. Okay, so obviously C is the incorrect one. Okay, the difference here is that the text must be much longer. So it's a lot longer than this. It's not only 4 or 5 sentences. It should be at least 2 paragraphs to a page long. Okay, the next one you could have students do is scanning. So in this one, scanning is a very authentic strategy that we use when we're trying to find information. You can use any type of genre, and any type of information can be asked for. So you can ask for dates, names, main ideas, verbs, whatever you want, they can find it. And remember, scanning refers to finding something quickly, so time should be included. If you're going to do this in class, which I think you can, I think it's really meaningful, you have to put a time limit on it, or else it's not scanning anymore. Okay, so possible stimuli that you could give your students in a scanning item. You can give them a 1 to 2 page news article, essay, chapter in a book, technical report, a table or chart that depicts research results, a menu, an application form, and on and on and on and on. Basically any genre is fine. So what's some information that you would have them find? So for the article, maybe the date, the name or place. In an essay, what's the setting, chapter, what are the divisions of the chapter, a technical report, the principal research finding or result reported in a specified cell or table, on the menu, cost of an item, and so on. Anything can be asked for. Okay, for interactive, you can also do sequencing. So for example, put the following sentences in order. If we were in the classroom, I would have asked you to do this because I find this to be a very interesting task. If you do it, you may find that there's actually more than one way to put these sentences together. And so as a teacher, if you're ever going to do ordering, make sure you do it by yourself and you try to determine how many correct answers there are. Secondly, you may notice something about the form of the sentences. You may notice that none of the sentences start with a capital letter, except for D, of course, but that's the person's name, and there's no punctuation at the end. That way, students cannot use their bottom-up skills to put the sentences together. They have to use their more global understanding of how a paragraph works. Okay, interactive reading, we can also do information transfer. So we can use reading charts, we can use maps, graphs, diagrams, and so on and so forth. But basically, from a test taker's perspective, because it's interactive, they need to comprehend the material, and then they have to pass the information along. Now, that doesn't mean they have to give it to another person. That could be write it somewhere else. The media, which is the map or the graph or the diagram, whatever it is you use, it assumes the reader's appropriate schemata for interpreting them. And it's accompanied by oral or written discourse, which means when you give your students some kind of chart or diagram, we are assuming that they already have the schemata, the background knowledge, and the background linguistic ability to complete it. So they have to have learned it before you assess them. Okay. In terms of comprehension, so learners must be able to comprehend the specific conventions of the various type of graphic. They need to comprehend labels, headings, numbers, symbols, comprehend the relations among the elements of the graphic, and they need to be able to make inferences that are not presented overtly. Okay, so a lot of different type of questions you can ask from this type of stimuli. So here are some example items. If you give them a map, you can ask them very simple questions. Where's the post office? If you give them a family tree, who's Tony's great-grandfather? If you give them some kind of statistical table, what does P less than 0.05 mean? If you give them a diagram of a steam engine, ask them to label the parts, so on and so forth. And typically what you will do in this kind is you will give them a text to read, and they have to find that information. They take the information from the text and then they label the diagram by reading about what each part does. That way, even if they don't know what a steam engine is, they can get the information from the one-page text that they're reading and then use that information to label the diagram. So you could imagine this graphic here. If the word bank was gone, money was gone, company, idea, concept, success, and team were all gone. There's a blank here. And then there's a story here that describes this graphic in great detail. For example, our graphic starts with a light bulb. This represents your idea. So I read that in the text and I say, oh, okay, so I know this one's idea, and I write it down. Okay, that's the idea of interactive information transfer. Okay, last one is extensive reading. So remember, this is top down, and to be honest, this one is unlikely to be carried out in a typical class setting because of time constraints. So it's very unlikely that you'll ask your students to write a research report in just 30 minutes of class time. And when we do extensive reading, assessment usually includes writing, unless you're going to do like an oral book report or something like that. Okay, so what are some tasks that you can do? The first is skimming. Okay, so we talked about skimming and scanning before, but something you can do at the extensive level is give them the entire story and then ask questions like, what's the main idea of the text? What's the author's purpose? What kind of writing is it? What type of writing is it? How easy or difficult do you think it will be? What do you think you'll learn from this text? So kind of some pre-reading questions you can give them. You can also do summarizing. So they can write a summary of the text. So here's an example item, and then some information for scoring. So if you do that type, what I want to say is for extensive reading, the scoring is very important, because even though you're asking students to write, remember, this is a reading assessment. And so how you score them should be based on their reading comprehension and or the strategies that they use, not necessarily on their ability to write. If it's all about their organization and grammar and things like that, now it's just a writing task. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's reading. So look at the scoring criteria. Express accurately the main idea and supporting details. So if a student is able to do that, even though they make a ton of mistakes, they could still get, mistakes in language, they could still get a pretty good score. Is it written in the student's own words? That means paraphrasing. Is it logically organized? Does it display facility in the use of language to clearly express the ideas in the text? So you still need to have a language focus, but you can see some of the other items are not language focused. Okay, you could also do responding. Okay, so here's an item where they read and then they have to respond. So this is your typical TOEIC or IELTS type writing task. But again, this one is for reading. So you have to understand the text first in order to respond appropriately. So look at the scoring. You demonstrate clear, unambiguous comprehension of the main idea and supporting ideas. You get the highest score. It doesn't say anything about your ability to write. Okay, this is the important part to notice here. All right, everybody, that is it. I know it was a long one today, but there's a lot of information in this one. Okay, make sure you complete the Google form, and I apologize again for not being there this week, but I will see all of you the following week. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.